Worried that I'm M28 losing my best friend turned girlfriend F26 to Lexapro. How should I approach her? Hi everyone, I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, but with all the necessary context. I met my girlfriend, let's call her Emma, in dental school, after I finished undergrad. She and I were part of the same class. Since day one of the program, 4 years in total, she and I were very close. Identical senses of humor, super similar upbringings, she and I both immediately clicked. So much so that many of our classmates, our class size was 50 in total, thought that we were secretly dating. She's absolutely beautiful too. However, for the first 3 years of the program, nothing intimate happened between the two of us. Year 1, I was still in a situationship type deal with my ex. Year 2, she started dating someone outside of dentistry before they broke up. Year 3, I was just too afraid to make a move and risk the friendship. 4th year of the program, she and I were on different clinical rotations, approximately 8 hours apart, but started flirting pretty heavily over Instagram DMs. She and I had always sent each other memes pretty consistently, but they became very charged to the point where we were essentially saying we wanted to sleep with each other. We decided to meet up at the main dental school location one weekend, where we had an amazing day together. In the evening we went out to a bar, then a club, came back to her apartment, and slept together for the first time. This was about 3 months prior to graduating, and afterwards we started, casually, dating to an extent. I took her out over spring break to my undergraduate alma mater city, spent an amazing day together, and we continued meeting up over several weekends to hook up. Now I had such an over-sheltered, socially isolated childhood growing up that it's always taken me a very long time to catch feelings for a girl. My first girlfriend was my lab partner in organic chemistry, and she was gorgeous, brilliant, and very fun to be around. She and I would go on hikes and spend hours talking to each other, never running out of things to say. And yet even with her, it took me around 6 months of serious dating before I even started to develop feelings for her, to the point that early in the relationship, she was insecure that I was just using her since she'd expected me to be so much clingier. I did fall in love with her eventually, but I've always been so independent that it just takes me a long time to develop a real kind of emotional connection to others when dating. This wasn't the case with Emma. By the second time we hooked up and were cuddling in bed, I was already developing feelings for her, and she told me she was feeling the same way. However, with only a couple of months before graduation, I was nervous to commit to her. I was going to be staying in this city to do a 1-year residency in general dentistry, while she was going straight to private practice over 3 hours away. After graduation in May, we still kept in touch to an extent, but it wasn't until Christmas that year that we actually visited each other again. I drove up from my parents' house to see her about 1.5 hours away, and we had a wonderful time catching up. Nothing intimate happened this time. When I was driving back home, she texted me that she'd really wanted to kiss me, but didn't want to mess up the dynamic. She then sent me a long string of texts about how she's always had trouble opening up emotionally, but that I mean so much to her, that she cares so much about me, and hopes that we'll always be close. There were other things too, but they were some of the sweetest, most genuine texts I'd ever received from someone, and I realized that I'd be making a massive mistake if I didn't at least attempt to actually date her. A couple of months later, so at this point, approximately 9 months after we graduated from dental school, I was going to a friend's wedding and invited her to be my +1. She agreed. We had an amazing night together, and while holding each other in the hotel bed, I told her that the only reason I'd never tried to officially date her was due to the distance between us, and the fact that I'd be applying to specialty programs and could potentially end up in another state for 2 to 3 years. She understood. We continued to talk, and I eventually asked her if she'd like to try dating despite the distance between us. She immediately agreed, and we became an official couple that night. The next 3 months were, from my point of view, like a dream. We alternated weekends in who would drive up to see the other, and always had a wonderful time. Our mutual friends and former classmates were all so excited we'd finally gotten together. My friends in residency were so happy for us, and she told me her parents, brother, sister had always really liked me and were so happy we were finally together. She's met my co-residents and the assistants I work with multiple times, who all said we were perfect together and such a good couple. She said that as a consequence of her upbringing, where her parents slept in separate rooms and acted more like roommates than husband, wife, that she's always struggled to show affection, but that hasn't been my experience at all. She's been the sweetest, most cuddly, physically affectionate girl I've ever been with, and throughout the week when apart we'd text and snap each other constantly. Up until about a week and a half ago, Emma has always had struggles with anxiety, primarily at night. She says during the day it's fine, as her mind is occupied treating, talking to patients, coworkers, etc. But at night, she's always had to combat racing thoughts and an overactive mind, to the point where she can sometimes struggle to fall asleep. She made an appointment with her about 3 weeks ago, and he prescribed her Lexapro and SSRI for the anxiety. I visited her about a week after she started taking the Lexapro. She told me that for the first 2 days, her body felt weird on it and would make her dizzy and lethargic, but that went away. However, she told me that it was making her feel extremely emotionally blunted, like she was a zombie, and that she was having to force herself to talk to patients and engage in conversations where previously it was natural. She told me that it was becoming hard for her to text people. She told me her coworkers were telling her she was acting different, but that typically these side effects can persist for 6 to 8 weeks or even longer before things stabilize. From what I've read online, about 70% of people who take Lexapro experience that emotional blunting, and oftentimes it doesn't go away after the initial transitory period. She and I still had a wonderful date night that day. Over the course of the next week, however, things started to change. Her texting frequency declined rapidly. Her texts were no longer as affectionate. I didn't think too much of it, but there was a difference. I visited her the next weekend to get lunch, and she seemed far more blunted than she had been the prior week. And when I was about to leave her place to drive back up to my apartment, she brought up some things that had been bothering her in our relationship. 1. She asked why I rarely spent the night at her place and instead drive back to my parents' or my apartment, when she always spent the night at my place when she visits. She asked if it was her dog that she'd gotten about 10 months ago, and I told her with full sincerity that that was the reason. Her dog, a boxer, is very nervous around new people, and though he's gradually warmed up to me, he makes spending the night very hard. He's used to sleeping with her in her bed, and the last time I spent the night at her place, he couldn't relax with me in there. We tried for hours, and every time I even slightly moved, he'd get nervous or upset, and if we locked him outside of the room, he'd bark. Neither of us were able to get any sleep until I moved to sleep in her living room, and the last time I visited her place, he started growling at me when she and I would make out. She scolded him heavily and apologized profusely, but her dog has been making things difficult. 2. She did say the distance was bothering her. However, I'm finishing up my residency in about a month and am joining a practice in her city, about 20 minutes away, so I told her that we'd be able to spend much more time together. I am applying to specialty programs this cycle, however, so she's concerned that if I get accepted and decide to join one, I'd only be in her city for a year before I could potentially have to move states away for 2 to 3 years. I've long had interest in becoming an endodontist, but I love general dentistry as well, so I told her I wasn't even positive I'd join the specialty program if I got accepted. It is a very real concern, however. 3. She told me that she fully trusted me and would never think that I'd cheat on her, but at night, sometimes she'd be worried about my assistant in residency, let's call her Amy. As part of our residency program, all of us residents get assigned an assistant to work with, and I got assigned Amy. She's 5 years younger than me, conventionally attractive, and she and I became close friends very quickly many months before I started dating Emma. Amy and I have very similar personalities, so before I started dating Emma, Amy and I would spend a lot of time together outside of clinic, albeit almost always with the other assistants or CO residents. We'd all go out clubbing, to bars, game nights, that sort of thing. And Amy has genuinely become one of my closest friends. Before dating Emma, Amy and I would constantly snap, text each other, update each other on our dating lives, vent our frustrations to each other, that sort of thing. But with all of that being said, nothing intimate has ever happened between me and Amy, and I've always viewed her almost as a little sister, if that makes sense. Emma met Amy a month ago and they immediately got along, but I stupidly never imagined my closeness with Amy would bother Emma. In hindsight, it's obvious that it would bother any girl, her boyfriend being that close with a girl he sees 8+ hours a day, so I apologized for that. She asked how I would feel if she was that close with a male coworker, and was snapping, texting him constantly, spending time with him after hours, that sort of thing. And she's right, that would have driven me crazy. I told Emma that Amy and I became friends well before Emma and I started dating, and I've always viewed the situation through my lens where I've never had any romantic feelings for Amy, but that in hindsight, I was definitely crossing boundaries and was going to try to distance myself from Amy. Amy was actually one of the people who pushed me to ask Emma out. With how much I'd talked about her before we started dating, but I feel like an idiot for not realizing until now how my closeness with Amy could have made Emma anxious and insecure. After this conversation, Emma's eyes brightened up and she seemed a lot happier, and I drove back to apartment. I later thanked her for telling me about these things that had bothered her, 'cause I genuinely didn't know, but that I was committed to our relationship and never wanted to make her feel anxious, insecure, or anything like that. She thanked me and said she struggled opening up about things like that but just had to get it off her chest. This was a week ago. However, things still aren't the same. Over the past week, she's still rarely texting me, and her texts don't have the same affection and sweetness that they did just 2 weeks ago. She still sends good morning and good night texts, still sends a lot of our inside joke emojis and all of that, but otherwise, there's such a lack of emotion. And it's not just me. She was always so active in some of our mutual friend and dental classmate group chats up until she'd been taking Lexapro for a week. Now she barely ever responds in those either. She just seems so emotionally absent. I've asked her to FaceTime multiple times this past week, and she'll always say that she wants to, but typically she'll be so drained after work that she won't have the energy. A lot of nights, she'll fall asleep on the couch watching TV well before bedtime and not respond until later. There's no intentional distancing in her texts, or coldness. There's just no emotion anymore. Still sending good morning, good night texts, but they lack the affection they did just 2 weeks ago. She knows she's very emotionally blunted. I mean, she literally told me she was experiencing that, and that her coworkers and everyone was telling her that she was acting different. But it seems like she has no interest in anything anymore. A few weeks ago, she'd love calling me and FaceTiming me. Now she can't even commit to that. And all this began a week after she started taking Lexapro. I've found countless posts on Reddit about partners starting Lexapro or Zoloft, and in so many of them, they said their partner became so distant, emotionally apathetic, uncaring usually 1 to 2 weeks after starting the SSRI. I read lots of posts from the perspective of the person taking Lexapro or Zoloft or some SSRI, where they'll talk about how they're losing any emotions or interest in their partner even though they'd say the relationship was so wonderful prior to taking the medication. Oftentimes they'll say that internally, they know that they have feelings for their partner, but they're so emotionally zombified that they just don't want to text, talk, cuddle, or really have any kind of intimacy with them whatsoever. A lot of people said they felt like they were falling out of love with their boyfriend, girlfriend, sometimes husband, wife shortly after starting an SSRI. And that seems to be what's happening in this situation. I've known Emma and been very close with her for 5 years. She's never been like this before. Her emotions are so dulled and I can barely even reach her these past few days. I know she brought up those relationship issues a week ago, but our talk seemed to go well and I don't think she's genuinely upset about those things after we talked it out. I just don't think she's feeling anything. Honestly, even if our relationship ends over this, I'll be fine. I have a great life, wonderful career, friends, all of that. But I also care about Emma immensely, and saw a future with her. We were best friends for years before we became a couple, and everything seemed to be going so well until she started taking this SSRI. How should I approach this situation? I haven't directly confronted her about the Lexapro or anything like that, but this isn't her. This isn't her at all. I know I shouldn't confront her about it in the context of our relationship or make it about me, my feelings, so how would you go about it? I know there's a chance the emotional blunting will go away eventually, but with how strongly she's feeling it I'm worried it won't. And I'm joining a private practice in her city in 2 months, largely because I wanted to be close to her. It felt like we had such a great future together. This whole thing just